Hey, Carlo, come on, do me a solid. Let us get on.
It says it's being live streamed.
What? Okay. Well, it says that it said that it was streaming and then it timed out and now I'm reopening it. Okay. Finally, we are here. Welcome to Nerd Church, the place where people who are in touch with reality can go to get catechesis. And where Christians who want to read the Bible without being idiots read the work of scholars that also want to read the Bible without being idiots. So, and it's also the place where sometimes we provide a little bit of data about the dogma, particularly when it comes to the history of Christianity and the Catholic Church. So, with all that said, here we are, and it is the first Sunday. Well, okay, it's either the first Sunday of Lent or the first Sunday in Lent, depending on how strict you are about grammar. Because since in English Lent is a season, technically it's in Lent, not of Lent. However, the official workbook for readers says that it's the first Sunday of Lent. So there we go. I'm pretty sure that Quaresma is just day, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because, because that's just because as we talked about earlier, in most of the rest of the world, Lent is just referred to as whatever 40 days is, or the 40, or something like that, will be in the local language. So English is just weird because English is just weird. Okay, so with all that said, I do, but before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of sympathy to friend of the show, Dr. Kip Davis, who, along with the rest of Canada, is in profound mourning following the 2-1 loss of the Canadian men's hockey team to the American men's hockey team. And, normally right now, I kind of feel like, shame and humiliation being piled on the US is, about what should be going on. However, I can feel kind of good about this particular hockey win just because it's a really good hockey story. In 2024, Johnny Gaudreau, also known as Johnny Hockey, who was a really fabulous left winger, and his younger brother Matthew, also a professional hockey player, were killed by a drunk driver while they were biking. And the American men decided to dedicate this year's playoff run, not playoff run, but Olympic run, to their teammate. And therefore, as a hockey story, I feel good about it. So there we go. And also, Johnny Hockey played for the Calgary Flames. So, club over country, it was a good day. Okay, so now that we've given our love to Kip, because also I really wish that he would be here because we're talking about Genesis, which is one of his favorite books. But I'm sure that Aldo will be able to fill us in on all of the really amazing Hebrew puns that are going on in this part of Genesis. So without further ado, I'm going to go in to screen sharing and we can see the readings. Maybe, okay, there we go. Okay. Can everybody see that now?
Not
No.
yet.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay. So the first Sunday in Lent, we are starting with Genesis 2, verse 7 through 9. And then there's a skip and it goes to and then restarts with Genesis 3, 1 through 7.
Perfect. Okay. The Lord God formed man out of the clay of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And so man became a living being. Then the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east and placed there the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made various trees grow that were delightful to look at and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals that the Lord God had made. The serpent asked the woman, "Did God really tell you not to eat from any of the trees in the garden?" The woman answered the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'You shall not eat it or even touch it, lest you die.'" But the serpent said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. No, God knows well that the moment you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods. You know what is good and what is evil." The woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves.
Okay. And then here we have the responsorial psalm, which is Psalm 51, 4 through 6, 12 through 13, and 17.
Correct. Have mercy on me, O God, in your goodness. In the greatness of your compassion, wipe out my offense. Thoroughly wash me from my guilt, and of my sin cleanse me. For I acknowledge my offense, and my sin is before me always. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. A clean heart create for me, O God, and a steadfast spirit renew within me. Cast me not out from your presence, and your Holy Spirit take not from me. Just 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Give me back the joy of your salvation, and a willing spirit sustaining me. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise.
Okay. And Amanda, if you would like to do Paul, we've got Romans 5, 12 through 19.
All right. Brothers and sisters, through one man sin entered the world, and through sin death. And thus death came to all men, inasmuch as all sinned. For up to the time of the law, sin was in the world, though sin is not accounted when there is no law. But death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who did not sin, after the pattern of the trespass of Adam, who is the type of the one who was to come. But the gift is not like the transgression. For if by the transgression of the one the many died, how much more did the grace of God and the gracious gift of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow for the many? And the gift is not like the result of the one who sinned. For after one sin there was the judgment that brought condemnation. But the gift, after many transgressions, brought acquittal. For if by the transgression of that one death came to reign through that one, how much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of justification come to reign in life through the one Jesus Christ? In conclusion, just as though one transgression, condemnation came upon all, so through one righteous act, acquittal and life came to all. For just as through the disobedience of one man, the many were made sinners, so through the obedience of the one, the many will be made righteous.
Okay. And then bringing us home with the gospel, we have Matthew chapter 4, 1 through 11.
At that time, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was hungry. The tempter approached and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become loaves of bread." He said in reply, "It is written, one does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes forth from the mouth of God." And then the devil took him to the holy city and made him stand on the parapet of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." And then the devil took him up to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their magnificence. And said to him, "All these I shall give to you, if you will prostrate yourself and worship me." At this, Jesus said to him, "Get away, Satan. It is written, the Lord your God shall you worship, and him alone shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him.
Okay. So there we go. You've got, obviously this, very I feel like sometimes the readings from the lectionary, they are just kind of put together sort of haphazardly. In this case, I think that the lectionary is building a really tight argument about the relationship of about what sin is and what original sin is, and kind of the contrast of sin and redemption and sin and obedience, um, because in Genesis you have this situation where Adam and Eve are being asked to like not do one thing, but they aren't given a reason or an explanation or anything like that. And I mean, and we can unpack that. But then you kind of contrast that to Jesus, who has full information about what's going on and still chooses to do what he's supposed to do, even though his consequences for disobedience, like with Jesus, it's like, oh, Satan is promising him, you disobey and you'll get all these really great rewards. And Jesus just says no, even though he has everything to gain through disobedience. So it's this sort of neat, kind of reversal of the two stories that I think that, it's interesting how these parallels are kind of implicit in the text. And certainly a lot of scholars will put this verse from Paul and this verse from Matthew and this verse from Genesis in conversation. And it's interesting that the lectionary kind of has the same project. And before we move on to that, I did just want to observe that in one of the books that I was consulting as I was reading this was God's Propaganda by Dr. Kip Davis. Here at Nerd Church, I would just like to state for the record that we fully embrace the Davis theory of God's propaganda authorship. The Davis theory of God's propaganda authorship is that the entire book was written entirely by Dr. Kip Davis. This duels with the Dagon theory of God's propaganda authorship, which holds that Kip Davis was merely the scribe and that the author of this book was Dagon, the abomination of the Philistines, who is in fact a Belgian Malinois.
Huh.
I am going up on a limb and going with the human who verifiably knows how to read Hebrew rather than the dog. But we are not scholars, so therefore we just try to present both sides of the argument and then indicate which ones we consider to be most plausible. Just throwing that out there. Okay, so now that I've become entirely unserious, Aldo is going to save everyone and explain to us what's going on in what's going on in Genesis. Aldo, you get to explain the fall to everyone. No pressure.
Oh, good. You have time?
Yeah.
We have a chair.
Yeah. Go for it. No pressure. We've got time.
So, this book is still so relevant today, and it was exactly the same in antiquity. So the interesting part about Genesis and the creation story, the creation of man and the fall, are taken up by different authors, and we will mention the Gnostics. We will mention some apocryphal literature to see how. Despite having almost exactly the same text, they would draw these sometimes far-fetched conclusions from the same account. So to start with, regarding the idea of the original sin, you must know that this is a later idea. It was developed by Saint Augustine of Hippo, and there's no original sin in the Jewish tradition. So the Jews only acknowledge that, of course, Adam and Eve, they disobeyed God, but there's no reason to think of, of sin as a kind of death as a kind of punishment, which is passed on to Adam's descendants. So,
Before you continue, I just want to take a second to clarify what we mean when we say original sin, because a lot of people, particularly if they're more familiar with Protestant theology, have probably run across this idea of original sin in combination with things like, say, the Calvinist doctrine of total depravity. And basically what I'm saying is that St. Augustine comes up with original sin, and then like about 1,000 years later, a bunch of Protestants start to get really weird with it. And the Catholic definition of original sin is really it really is treating this story about as an etiology. So if you guys will just indulge me, I want to take a second and read paragraph 405 from the Player's Handbook, otherwise known as the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So, although it is proper to each individual, original sin does not have the character of a personal fault in any of Adam's descendants. It is a deprivation of original holiness and justice, but human nature has not been totally corrupted. It is wounded in the natural powers proper to it, subject to ignorance, suffering, and the dominion of death, and inclined to sin, an inclination to evil that is called conspicuous. CONCUPICENCE. I cannot figure out how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. Baptism, by imparting the life of Christ's grace, erases original sin and turns a man back towards God, but consequences for nature, weakened and inclined to evil, persist in man and summon him to spiritual battle. Okay, so I apologize for my inability to sound out that particular Latin word, but you see but I want to be really clear what we're talking about, because we're just going to be throwing around the term original sin. We are using it in basically the way that Augustine of Hippo meant it, which is basically, this is why people, have you noticed that people kind of are jerks sometimes? Well, this is our explanation about why people are jerks. Like, even little kids can be kind of jerks, old people, jerks, young people, jerks, all of us, jerks. That's what the Catholic understanding of original sin is. And I just want to like make that absolutely clear, so that when we are unbothered by this doctrine, we are unbothered by the idea that people are jerks. We are not unbothered by the idea that like unbaptized 5-year-olds might boil in a lake of fire, because we don't believe that that's what happens. That's not what the Catholic Church teaches. That doesn't get defended here. So please continue. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much for that. So so the serpent. To start with, ideas, or perhaps this idea that the serpent is identified with Satan is of course post-biblical. And here the serpent has no relationship to Satan, to the devil, to whatever evil force you may have in mind.
Out of curiosity, do you know when people like decided, aha, that must be Satan?
Well, it's of course, in the book of Revelation, we have this idea coming together, in the sense that the serpent is identified with Satan or with the dragon.
Okay.
But there are some apocryphal texts which start this kind of evolution towards that idea. So, for example, in the Testament of Abraham, there's a retelling of the story of the fall, and there the serpent is considered some kind of angel, and this angel is first of all, it isn't exactly a serpent, so it's kind of a reptilian being, for those people who are fond of conspiracy theories. So
The lizard people,
lazy
call
people, yeah.
it.
So it is a humanoid reptilian being. It has 6 wings. It has feet. It has legs and feet. It has arms and hands. And that is the being who is tempting Eve. So there's already in this testament of Abraham the idea of merging just a serpent, because it says, now the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals. So either all the animals are evil, or the animals are just animals, as the plain meaning of the text suggests. And but on the other hand, so we have this ancient what would be later called heresy, and which comes from a group called the Alphites. They were a Christian group, and they said that the serpent was in fact Jesus, because they refer back to this verse in John where it says that they equate Jesus to the bronze, to the how do you call it in English? It is the bronze serpent.
In English, it's just the bronze serpent.
Bronze serpent. Okay.
Yeah. It like sometimes they'll specify a name, but usually I just see it called the bronze serpent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So then
And there was also, wasn't there one that said that like Cain was fathered by the serpent?
That's right. Yeah, I think it was we mentioned that in one of our first live streams, where there's this tradition in one of the Targums, which I often quote, about these Aramaic Jewish translations of the Hebrew Bible. There's this one where so this gets interesting because in this Aramaic text, it is not the serpent, but it is Samael, like it is in rabbinic literature,
Yeah.
there's God, there's the archangel Michael, who is the one who does you know, God's will in the sense of doing good things. But then
Yeah.
there's the counterpart, the evil counterpart, Samael, who is an evil angel who does all the dirty work. So it is said that Samael was the one who seeded the Cain and his and the people who came from him. But Christian tradition then interprets that as the serpent. And in some apocryphal gospels, it is mentioned how Eve got impregnated by the serpent explicitly. Never, as far as I know, never in Jewish literature. I may be wrong, but I think it is never, the serpent is never equated to Satan. And if that is the case, it may be from medieval times and onwards.
Yeah. Well, the and kind of the idea that there's something going on with the serpent was pretty common in Gnosticism in general,
Mhm.
because most of the Gnostics, as far as we know, tended to believe that the creator God in the Old Testament was not actually God, that
Right,
it was some kind of like weird lesser being, and that therefore what Satan is doing according to the Gnostics is basically busting Adam and Eve out of prison.
correct,
um and that, obviously does not become the Orthodox Christian view, although there is still a tendency, I think, in Catholicism at least, to sort of look at the fall as like not totally a bad thing, because it's, you have the fall, but then you have the crucifixion, so everything can be redeemed, so really it's okay.
correct.
Which is why I think that a lot of the Catholic interpretations of the fall go really hard on this question of obedience, because it's like God asked Adam and Eve to just do this one thing. That was all they had to do, not eat the tree. It's not hard, just don't eat the tree, right? And I think, it's like, to me, it's kind of useful to understand, like, well, why didn't they do it? Right. And I think that at least for me, it kind of comes back to this idea of like, if you tell somebody not to do something and you just give them like a vague threat of death, we all know that is not an effective way to keep human beings from doing anything. But so in that sense, it's kind of hard to read the fall and say that, knowing what we know about people, this is not going to turn out any other way. Which is why, of course, most scholars will argue that, this is clearly intended to be an explanation about why is the world the way the world is, rather than a literal depiction of historical events. Because let me make this 125% absolutely clear for any Protestants who might be listening, or indeed any trad Caths who might be listening, who have decided that, the Council of Trent understood science. Okay. Genesis is not a history textbook. Genesis is not a science textbook. Genesis is a story about the world that teaches us about people and about people's relationship to God and how people sin. We have been reading the story that way since Augustine of Hippo. That's a really, really, really long time, and Augustine's a saint. Do you think that you're better at reading the Bible than Augustine of Hippo?
Don't ask that question. You don't want to know the answer.
Okay, yes, they do think that they're better than reading the Bible than Augustine of Hippo. However, I would just point out that Pope Leo is a massive St. Augustine fanboy, and he has a really impressive collection of baseball bats at this point. So, okay. Pope Leo would not actually hit someone with a ball bat for disrespecting St. Augustine of Hippo. And I don't want to imply that. But he might think about it really, really hard. Just for a second. Just for a second. That's all I'm saying. Because I really do think that one of the main temptations of being a high-ranking Catholic clergyman has to be the knowledge that 500 years ago, you could have just put this guy in a dungeon and you wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. And they're choosing not to do that. And, we need to support them. But anyway, we're getting off topic.
Okay,
and there's a lot more Genesis to get through. So Adam and Eve are both clever and naked.
Mhm. So usually the way historians, well, not historians, so scholars in general see these passages, that there are parallels in the ancient Near East. And what they say about this is that in some way the gods, humanity was created by the gods, and then the gods had this special tree, the tree of life. And just as in Genesis, the fruit of this tree has the ability to make people or anyone who eats from the tree immortal. So that is why the serpent warns Eve and says, "You certainly will not die." No, God knows well that the moment you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods who know what is good and what is evil. Sorry, about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the tree of life would make people immortal as well. So here it isn't about obedience as in Jewish or Christian tradition, but it is about the gods being gatekeepers to immortality and knowledge. And that is the reason they are, well, in the Near Eastern myths, it is the gods, but in the Bible, it is just the who will later become known as the God of Israel. And then there's this, there's an interesting,
and in the ancient Near Eastern stories, isn't it really explicit that humans are created to do work?
That's correct, and that may be touching up on some of those Zechariah Sitchin ideas on people mining for God for the on people mining for gold for the gods or
Oh yeah, there's a lot of really strange theories about the Anunnaki.
Theories, yeah.
Yeah, and how space aliens came to Earth to mine for gold, and it gets very serious. It gets very silly, very, very fast.
Let's see. So there's some other interesting things. So, for example, at the end, it says, and they realized that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. And there's this ancient tradition, rabbinic tradition, about um, there was there were some variant readings in the manuscripts because of a phonetic similarity between the this comes later, of course, but it is said that God gave garments made out of leather or some kind of animal skin.
Mm-hmm.
But in Hebrew, the word for skin or for leather is or. And then there was this rabbi who had a scroll of Genesis which read not or leather, but it read or light. And there are some Gnostic ideas where Adam was a being of light created by angels, not by God. And there was this other idea. Just let me get my thinking straight. Um, oh, so perhaps you may remember this movie which was produced some years ago, the Darren Aronofsky's Noah movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Those, Mhm.
I kind of quit watching it after the first 5 minutes. It was too many animals getting ripped in half.
Yeah. That is, but there's so it's very interesting in the sense that this movie makes echoes lots of these rabbinic traditions. So there's a part where I think it was Noah who was um, retelling the story of Genesis, and there were these flashbacks, and then Adam and Eve appear as two luminous beings. So that is where it comes from, and from
That,
this
yeah,
alternate reading.
yeah. That's something that's just like weird to me about the recent run of biblical movies in general, is they're all like heavily based on like rabbinic traditions or non-canonical gospels or something like that. Like there was recently what was supposed to be a movie about Mary and Joseph,
Mhm.
but it was like totally, but it was like totally based on a couple of the infancy gospels. And it was really strange because it had the whole thing about Mary being a servant in the temple, and
Mhm.
she and Joseph has this weird kind of meet cute, and his staff, his staff gets flowers, I think. I don't remember if that part happens in the movie, but the whole thing was very strange. um Oh, when I said servant, I wanted to bring up one thing that Kip Davis brought up in his book, is that the Hebrew verb abad um, has a relation to the noun abed, which is slavery. And what Dr. Davis argues is that Adam's purpose is to serve the ground, the Adamah, from which he was formed. There was no, because it says there was no man to work the soil. So the idea is that like maybe humans are made from earth to become earth to serve the earth,
Mhm.
which I think is a really I just wanted to highlight that and see what you thought of the of that connection because it's really tightly based on the Hebrew. And I can't evaluate that part intelligently.
Mhm.
But just as a person, I really like the idea that humans are of the earth and part of the earth and meant to care for the earth, not that it's like we have dominion, domination, ownership that just uses and uses and uses and doesn't care.
Correct. Yeah, you just opened a can of worms right there. So, but it's a very interesting one in the sense that uh, that's right. In Hebrew, there is so Hebrew grammar works with roots, triliteral roots. So almost always you will have three letters, which will give you a which will be used, to make verbs, to make nouns, to make adjectives, and whatever you want. And referring to Adam, Adam is no. The name is loaded in the sense that it comes from. There are two roots. So there is Edom, which is red in color, and then there's Adama, which is the earth, the ground. So there's this idea about a red ground is from the dust of the earth, and he so there's this pun on these three words: Adam, the name of the first human, Adama, the ground, and Edom, the color red,
Yeah, and
and Samasti.
yeah,
Mhm.
I wonder about the reason why it's red because I know like in Egyptian literature there's a distinction between the red land, which is the desert, and then
Mhm.
there's the black land, which is the fertile land, it's the farmland. And I mean, as somebody who lives in a city in a desert, that's something that has always struck me about Genesis is that when Genesis is talking about nature, it's this very like it seems to be picturing a desert environment outside of Eden, right? So it's like you almost have this like walled garden. And because people have built it and are cultivating it, it's growing and flourishing. And it's almost like this idea that like building building a place for people to live takes work. Like you can't just go somewhere and just like start living there because you have to water the plants and you have to raise the animals and you have to do all these things. Um, and I think that idea of work being just kind of in the human condition is a really interesting idea because I think very often when people and I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, I swear. But I think that um, very often people say, well, nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to have a job. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to do that. Right. And I think that maybe if we kind of take that idea out of Genesis, that no, people are made to work. Working is what we do. We may not want to go to an office and push paper 8 hours a day, or we may not want to go out and dig holes, but we do want to work. We want to do things for ourselves and for our community and to take care of everyone. But anyway, okay, so I'm sorry. It's Genesis. It's a lot. I'm just going off on tangents.
Sure, no problem. I mean, we could just spend many episodes and many lives trying to untangle all the ancient
Oh,
traditions and interpretations about the book of Genesis. So,
oh yeah, yeah. Genesis just goes on forever. Was there anything that's like really pressing that you think that we still
mm,
need to say about Genesis?
I think that's it. Well, I would just like to mention the fact that there are some traditions, some Gnostic traditions where they say, so it is the way man was created was through this kind of magical alchemical procedure because man would be made up of the four elements. So you would have the clay of the ground, which would be water and earth, and then even though it is not mentioned in the text, they would assume that God is modeling some kind of clay figure, and then he would have to put it into an oven. There you would have fire, and then finally he would imbue life into this figure by breathing into his nostrils. So there you would have the four elements: air, water, fire, and what's the other one? Air, water, fire, and wind.
Yeah, and wind. Yeah. Which is interesting because it's sort of implied in Christian and Jewish tradition, and then the Quran just comes straight out and says it that humans are made of earth and angels are made of air, and then the jinn are made of fire.
Mhm.
Um, and then we don't know what, and as far as I know, nothing has been proposed that's made out of water.
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, yeah, not that I know about. I don't know, maybe it's octopuses. Octopi are the fourth thing that God made, and that's why they live in the ocean and
That's
successfully
right.
predict World Cup matches. Um, um, but yeah, and that was one thing I just have to shout out God's propaganda again. But that was also one thing that Kip Davis brought up, is that this creation of Adam, where it's not just God saying, let there be, and there was, right? This is God getting down in the dirt, like shaping, like with clay, right? This is God actively working to build people. And I think that that kind of dovetails neatly into the idea of the incarnation, because you have this idea that God has to get, because you can see where Christian writers later on are picking up on this idea that essentially to make people, God has to really like get down in there and get his hands dirty, so to speak,
Right.
in order to make people fit into this whole project. And I think that's kind of interesting too.
Mhm.
Okay. So anything else?
Um, well, I will just briefly mention there is this, there are lots of puns in this passage, and I will just mention, for example, Eve in Hebrew is called Hava, which comes from this Hebrew root for the idea of life. So that is the way the Greek translation renders the name of Eve. It is either Eva or it is Zoe. Zoe as in zoo, as in life, and as in zoology, for example. And then there's this other pun on the words that the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals. So that's in Hebrew, it is called Arun. And then when Adam and Eve notice, they realize that they were naked, the word is merumim. So both words are similar, and if you look at them in the Hebrew text, they are almost identical. So there is this pun on the words that the serpent was cunning, room, and they realized they were naked, merumim. And that makes for a very interesting the way in which these texts were
So,
created.
so if I'm understanding correctly, in the pun, it's kind of implied that they became like the snake.
Yeah, that would be one of the interpretations or the readings of these.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on, but one of the points is that they and the snake have become similar.
Exactly. That would be a way to put it.
Yeah.
And then for the psalm, I think the idea for choosing this psalm is to reinforce the idea that Genesis is talking about original sin. So it is trying to, it is showing this person um, looking for God's forgiveness, to be brought back to salvation, to acknowledge their offense, and all these ideas about being guilty of some kind of offense towards God, but then trying to go back to God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right there. The only thing that I really had to add about the Psalm, we didn't do an episode for the Ash Wednesday readings this year. But I think that's okay because the Ash Wednesday readings don't actually change from year to year. And we have to have some new content. We have to have, more new content for next year. But one of but the psalm that got read today is the same psalm that was read out during the Ash Wednesday masses. So again, if we're kind of going back to this project of imagining what our stereotypical Catholic who's going to church as often as they're supposed to, and maybe a little bit more, is hearing. So this psalm would have been read on Ash Wednesday, and then like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 4 days later on Sunday, hearing the same psalm and kind of reinforcing these themes of repentance and coming back to God and rejecting sin.
Mhm.
Um, and now we have our Paul. Yeah,
I actually love this passage paired with the fall,
yeah,
because so often the fall is read as the fall of women and then the temptation that they pose to men.
yeah. And one thing that and one thing that I'd like to bring up is like that whole idea of like Eve as the temptress. I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist in Catholicism, because yes, it absolutely does. But at least like in my lifetime, the tendency has been to go like, okay, they both sinned. Like Adam sinned, Eve sinned, and and because Paul is saying, like man collectively, right?
Mhm.
So that's all of us, men and women,
Well,
sinned.
he's actually talking about one man.
Yeah,
By
one,
one man, sin
right,
entered the world,
right,
and by another, life has entered the world.
right.
So
Yeah,
he's making a
yeah, actually, yeah,
powerful, like, theological argument about like grace.
yeah. Actually, that's true. I did make the mistake of almost reading original sin back into Paul, and you got me. because it's true. I mean, Paul doesn't have a notion of original sin, but at the same time, I think that it's really easy to see how Augustine could have taken that part of Romans and gotten original sin out of it, because the parallel between Jesus and Paul is so perfect. I mean, between Jesus and Adam is so perfect. It's like, and it's also kind of making the fall into like this thing that's like, in one way, it's this big cosmic thing, but it also doesn't matter because Jesus fixed it.
Well, and it's highlighting how uh in incredible the gift is that one man in one instance can fix it.
Right.
After one man and then a bunch of following men
Yeah,
who
exactly.
continue to mess it up.
Right. Well, yeah, but I mean, it's the but it basically comes back to the idea that, you know, like people will sometimes say, well, bad things just happen because we live in a fallen world, right? And this is kind of rejecting the idea that things have to be terrible. It's like things are terrible
I mean,
because the fall happened, but also Jesus came so things can be okay again.
yeah, Paul is very hopeful, honestly, if
Yeah.
you really read what he writes, like especially what we think he actually wrote. I have
Yeah.
to say, this passage is part of why, even as a kid, I like was suspicious of Second Timothy, because
Yeah.
Second Timothy has a completely different story about the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas Romans, and particularly this section of Romans,
Hmm.
is generally considered to be authentic to Paul. Um, and partially and the reason why a lot of modern critical scholars are willing to put weight on that is because because Romans, and specifically that, like this section in Romans, is in Marcion's collection of Paul's letters. Because again, Marcion is this really interesting early second century figure who is apparently the first person to actually compose a Christian canon. And several scholars in the last couple of years. Does David Litwa have a reconstruction of Marcion yet?
Not that I know of. I know he has, well, about Martin's Gospel, there's lots of authors,
Yeah, but
Roth and the like, but it is Litwa the one who translated the Apostolos.
yeah, but and then Jason Baden has actually gone through, and by reading a bunch of Christian authors who heavily quote Marcion, has kind of put together his best guess about what Marcion's collection of Paul looked like. So when I'm saying that Marcion included this part of Romans, what I mean is that someone like Tertullian quoted Marcion or said, Marcion says da 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 da. And it's clearly referring to this section of Romans. But yeah, this is, I think, kind of really nicely laying out, kind of Paul's theory of salvation, which is basically the crucifixion happened and everything's okay now.
You just
We
have to
don't,
take it.
but
You just
yeah,
have to take it.
yeah, exactly. It's like,
Sorry, I grew up on the Romans Road. I don't know if you guys know what that is.
no, what's the Romans road?
Roman road is the uh it's the patches you're supposed to use for like to convince somebody that they need to be saved. And it's uh like for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Like Romans 5:8. Shoot, I have these all memorized, but do I remember them right now when I mention it? No.
That's okay.
But it's it's a very specific
Yeah.
um thing. And it's I guess I don't want to track. Jeez. I just want to remember what the Romans road is. Help me out.
I'm sorry. I got nothing.
Okay. Romans 3:28, 3:23, for all of sin and falls short of the glory of God. Sorry, and I'm gonna quote all these in King James because that's how I learned them
Go ahead.
as a kid. And the Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And these are like really like the problem with these is largely that it's like a snapshot, this like really snippet of this really long theological argument that Paul is
Yeah.
having. And so like you can make it do a lot
Yeah.
that Paul
And
didn't intend.
yeah.
Um
And I hope I mean and I hope I'm not coming off as like, overly picky on Protestants, but that's one of the reasons why I really don't like proof texting is
this
because you're just kind of ripping out these like little sections out of context, and it's like it's treating the whole Bible as a quote mine, right? It's like, oh, that line sounds kind of cool, so I'm just going to pull it out and use it. And as we just saw, Paul has a really complicated theological argument that really deserves some room to breathe and be appreciated.
yes, yes, yes. And then the last one is Romans 5:8, which is God commendeth his love towards us. And while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
So that's like the neatly timed up. But um yeah, so there's a lot of talk in Protestant circles about using scripture to read other scripture, which actually I think is a great idea because it actually, like, if you're really doing it, you can really think more deeply and maybe prevent yourself from going a little off the rails. Um, I just he's not done very well, very often.
Well, and
Because
also,
when you read, so say, Second Timothy, you read Second Timothy and you go, well, clearly it says no women can have any leadership positions in church because of the fall of Eve, and therefore women are more easily deceived. And you're like, well, do you read the whole passage and then you hold this up as like perfectly fine while simultaneously believing all this stuff in Romans without ever connecting the two?
yeah, exactly. Because, again, it has to be all about, I think anyway, putting these verses in conversation
Oh, 100%.
and seeing
100%
what they say.
because Second Timothy also right before he says that bit the whoever wrote Second Timothy, who right before that bit about who can be like a deacon and who can be an elder and all that. There's a bit about women being saved by childbirth, and I just want to scream, like, am I saved? Do you think I'm saved? Do you think I ever will be?
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
in my 40s. If
yeah.
it hasn't happened yet, it's not gonna.
Well,
So, like, is that a hill you want to die on? I think you need to read that and you need to think about how
yeah.
you take
Mhm.
that.
Well,
Sorry,
and
little rant. I'm a little hot about it.
yeah. Well, you should and you should be hot about it. And this is why I get this is where, I get to, pull out my, smug Catholic emotions and point out that, as many weird and problematic ideas that the Catholic Church has currently and has had in the past about marriage and sexuality that have caused and continue to cause real harm and emotional distress to real humans. The one thing that we didn't do was decide that every human being on the planet is meant to marry and have babies. Because in Catholic understanding, if you don't get married and have kids, that's fine.
Yeah, it's a little
Like,
difficult in Protestant circles. Well,
yeah,
depends on the Protestant circle.
yeah,
This is not an issue at my Episcopalian church. It
yeah,
is completely a non-issue. No one cares. No one treats me any differently. There are other people who are older who are unmarried. Like it's fine. It's not a big deal. I am in Baptist circles a very odd duck.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's weird and like everybody else is like we're not making it weird and I'm like yes you are,
yeah,
you're making it weird. I'm
yeah,
not making it weird, I'm just noticing that you're making it weird.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So anyway, but we are not in Timothy, we're in Romans, and we do have
Sorry.
Paul going. And but that's okay because this is Paul just going, you know what? You know, Jesus, played the Uno reverse card on the fall. So everything's okay now.
Well, that's why he's a big Jesus guy.
Exactly.
That's why he's convinced everybody needs to hop on the Jesus train and
Yeah,
power
exactly.
right into the kingdom of heaven.
Exactly.
Because why else would you choose anything else
Yeah.
if Jesus
Well,
fixed it? Come on.
it's kind of, and it's also kind of setting up, again, this nice parallel between Adam and Jesus, right?
Mhm.
Where Adam only had to do one thing and Jesus only had to do one thing. And Adam didn't do like, okay, let me phrase it better. Adam and Jesus both had one job. And Adam didn't do his job and Jesus did his job, even though Jesus's job was objectively a lot harder than Adam's job, which again,
And arguably only required because Adam didn't do his job.
exactly. Exactly. Like Jesus just, I can imagine, like in heaven, Jesus, like, descends into hell, busts through Hades like the Kool-Aid man, because in my head canon, Jesus descending into Hades is just busting through a wall. And he looks at Adam and he goes, dude, you had one job. You had one job. And Adam goes, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. And Jesus is like, yeah, it's cool, come on up.
I got it solved.
It's good. I figured it out. But the point is that, and again, that's kind of where it's important to understand that the people who were writing the New Testament had the Old Testament. Like that was their Bible. And yeah, and not that the Old Testament as we know it had finally gelled, right? So perhaps it would be more correct to say that they had the Old Testament plus a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't actually make it into the canon. But they had everything that we have and some things we don't. So when you're finding parallels to, oh yeah, this totally riffs off of Genesis, or this totally is pulling in this imagery from Exodus, of course it does, right? It doesn't prove univocality. it doesn't improve that this was divine inspiration in the sense of automatic writing, right? It just proves that Paul was a human being who was absolutely marinated in the Torah to the point that when he's trying to explain why everything is okay right now, his move is going to go back to the etiology from Genesis about how everything got messed up to start with. Because for Paul, it's all part of the conversation.
Well, I think he's laying out a good example for us. He's putting things in conversation because that's not, I mean, if you read Romans, even in this passage, a little outside, not what we read, he's referencing other scriptures as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, unless anything unless anyone has anything else to say about Paul, I think I think that we can I think that we're in a good spot to segue to the passage from Matthew, which is like, okay, can we just take a minute to appreciate this on a literary level? I mean, this has to be like one of the best dialogue scenes in like human history, right? You've got Satan and Jesus, just the two of them. There's really not a lot of action going on. I mean, we kind of get these like stage directions almost. Oh, they're at the top of the temple. Oh, they're here. Oh, they're there. But it's basically just a conversation. And that was kind of the first thing that I thought of when I read it, honestly, was like, how many times have we seen this in a movie? Right? Where you have, like the young idealistic police officer, and he gets pulled aside by the older corrupt cop who tells him, no, this is the way we really do things around here. Or even in Revenge of the Sith, right? The conversation between Palpatine and Obi-Wan, not Anakin Skywalker, right? Where he's telling him, the myth of Darth, whoever the wise, right? And it's that kind of just amazing dialogue scene, right? Where you have these two characters who, like, even if you didn't know the Bible, even if you didn't know who Jesus was and you didn't know who Satan was, you could read this and you get the interaction. And I always just like to take a minute and go, whoever it was that wrote this, you did a really good job. Like kudos, man. One thing that also struck me, and maybe Aldo can expand on this a little more, is that there's something that's very Jewish about the structure of this conversation, in that you have these two characters of Jesus and Satan who are talking to each other, and they're arguing back and forth about what's the morally correct action. What should we be doing in this situation? Like Jesus is in the desert, he's hungry. Satan tells him, okay, the Bible says it's totally cool for you to make bread. And then he says no and comes up with his own scriptural citations to back it up. And I think that it's interesting that kind of this moment that in some ways is the most supernatural, right? The most, kind of magical fairy tale, this is not the real world that we live in. At the same time, gets this like sense of realism from it just from the fact that like Jesus and Satan are arguing like a couple of rabbis. And no, to be clear, I am not saying rabbinical argument is in any way satanic. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that the author of Matthew, when he was imagining a dialogue between two people, was imagining it going down like two rabbis fighting over scripture. And that's kind of cool, especially since, the good guy wins. But maybe if you could kind of talk about maybe some of the specific passages that get cited by Jesus when he's explaining why he's going to obey.
Sure, let's see. So,
And
so
if
in some,
if you don't know it off the top of your head, that's fine. I realize that like this is just an idea that kind of like popped into my head like as we were going through this today. And I'm sure that you spent all of your time getting ready for Genesis because
yeah,
oh my word, is Genesis a lot.
yeah, pretty much that was the case in this
Yeah.
occasion. So
Well,
I usually,
that's okay if you don't have it off the dome. It was just kind of a passing thought on my part because um those verses have to have come from someplace. You know what? I'm just going to go grab the Jewish Guide to the New Testament and look it up real quick while you guys talk.
Mhm. Well, reading this passage from Isaiah 60, one does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes forth from the mouth of God. At least in my opinion, it has to do with this idea where there is a transition between the law being just a bunch of commandments and then becoming this kind of sustenance that God provides to people. And in later biblical literature, certainly in rabbinic literature, the Torah is compared to the tree of life. So um, it is not only the word of God, the Torah, um, just an instruction manual for people on how to live, but also the source of life itself.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I found it. Um, okay, so Jesus's responses in chapter 4 are all from Deuteronomy. And that actually gets to be important according to the the fine people who put together the Jewish annotated New Testament,
Mhm.
because that becomes one of the arguments for the fact that Jesus is quoting Deuteronomy in Matthew becomes part of the argument for keeping the Hebrew Bible and specifically Deuteronomy in the canon. Because if you don't have Deuteronomy, you don't have the context for what Jesus is saying. So, you've got to be able to at least know why Jesus is saying what he's saying when he's quoting Deuteronomy.
Mhm.
Um, and then, yeah, and I think it's, worth, like looking at, maybe a little bit what all the temptations are, right? Because you get, because it's interesting that one of the things that Jesus is not tempted with is like physical pleasure,
Mhm.
right? And he's not, yeah, well, I mean, he's tempted with food, but that's what the body needs to survive. And everything else that's being offered to him is basically worldly power. And I was thinking as I was reading it, that's kind of, in a way, part of Matthew's argument about, well, okay, why wasn't Jesus a military messiah, right? Why didn't Jesus go in and cleanse the temple and establish the messianic kingdom of the house of David that's going to reign forever and ever and ever? And basically, Matthew's answer to that is that wasn't the plan. And that was never the plan, because Jesus was offered worldly power. Jesus was offered being saved from death. Jesus was being offered being spared physical suffering. But that was a temptation. That was evil. And he turned that down. So what it's almost so implicit in this is the idea that Jesus is essentially choosing crucifixion over empire, because whatever it is that's going on with his messiahship, it's not going to be this sort of assumption of military power. And of course, because, as we're reading the text, we're seeing something, it's the kind of, classic thing where the reader gets to find out more about the plot than the people in the story do. Because if you think about it, when we're reading Matthew, we're seeing this conversation between Jesus and Satan that's happening out in the desert with nobody around to observe it. Which means that obviously this is something that is, at least to some degree, a literary creation, right? Simply because obviously, even if you want to imagine some version of this happening, no one would have been around to see it.
And it would have been weird for Jesus to be like, well, did you know what just happened?
Yeah, exactly.
I did. And then he said.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
it's a weird thing to imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we've all done that. Like when we're telling a story, the the other person is just a little bit, maybe their arguments aren't quite as good as they were in the conversation. Maybe we're a little bit funnier. Our quote is a little more appropriate. And and that's all in there too. Although I do kind of like the close at the end of the angels coming and ministering to him, because we don't know what that looks like. And I don't know. I've recently gotten into this Portuguese EDM artist, Padre Herme. And I always like the angels ministered to him, and it's like, boom, light show, hallelujah, hallelujah, drops the beat. I don't know, I'm just being silly now, but now there was one question that I had. Okay, it describes Jesus fasting in the desert. And very often that will get described, to at least to modern Catholic audiences, as like Jesus was like taking in no food or no water, and he could do that because he was God. And therefore, you can, not eat meat on Fridays. What are you whining about? but to a first century audience, when they hear Jesus was fasting, what kind of physical like discipline, what kind of like what is he eating, what is he not allowed to eat, what does fasting look like?
Well, it's not as radical as we would think, in the sense that they were allowed to eat for prolonged fasts. At least you would eat closer to the evening. You would eat some bread and drink some water, and the rest of the day you would just be fasting. So it would be like, at least for me, who practice intermittent fasting, that would be like a nomad, 1 meal a day. So it wouldn't be that, it would be, of course, bread would have very little nutrients. It would be a small portion, and it would be, just the necessary amount of food to live through. And that I derived from these later practices, which we talked about this Merkava seminar, where people would fast for 3, 12, 40 days, just eating bread and drinking some water. So I guess perhaps I'm projecting that kind of practice back to first century Judaism, but we do not have much detailed information on that. Um, and the longest fast you would do in rabbinical Judaism would be on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and that would be just 25 hours. And during those 25 hours, people would not eat or drink anything.
Yeah,
And that's
but the
mhm,
Yom Kippur fast is kind of its own special category,
right.
correct? Yeah.
Mhm,
So we're probably so but we can at least say that that most of the people the first people who heard this story would have assumed that Jesus was probably on like bread and water.
correct.
Yeah. Which again kind of, ties in with that, with the manna in the desert idea too.
Exactly. Yeah, and what I was about to tell you is that this temptations narrative, at least in my mind, and I guess I'm not the only one, but it echoes the 40 years the Israelites were wandering in the desert. So there's when they are tempting God, asking for food, and then God sends them the manna and the quails. And then there's even this, at least in Matthew, there's this quotation from Deuteronomy where it says, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." That comes from Deuteronomy 6:16. And so that is the idea behind fast, because in a sense, Jesus is representing the whole people of Israel in this passage.
Yeah. So it's almost like this weird role reversal. Whereas in Exodus, you have the people are asking God for something, and God's giving it to them, even though he knows that it's probably not going to be good for them in the end.
Mhm.
Whereas in Matthew, you have Jesus who is God, or is the people of and is the people of Israel.
Mhm.
And I think in this case, you're right that we should be looking at him as more of a representative of Israel than, as the divine. In this case, we can say his human nature is foregrounded. Hi, Tuco. Um, um, that essentially we have this situation where this human is in the desert and they're being offered all of these things. They're being offered food, they're being offered power, and the human is on their own deciding that they don't want it. it's like instead it's like in one case you have the human saying do this and God saying okay, and the other one you have the supernatural being Satan saying do
Mhm.
this and the human says no. And it's this, one thing that I'm really appreciating more as we're kind of going through this is just how closely the people who composed the New Testament were reading the Hebrew Bible, and not necessarily in the sense of like they're getting all of the details right, or they're even coming up with like what at that time would have been a normal interpretation, but just like these guys are like cooked in these stories. It's just like they know these stories so well that they're throwing up parallels. I think maybe even sometimes without meaning to, in much the same way that, this sort of scene of temptation has gotten played out in like 1,000 movies. And I'm sure that at least some of those writers were as kids heard this story. And so when they have to decide, okay, well, what does a temptation scene sound like? Right? What happened, and like, people will even use the phrase in English, like, yeah, the devil took the, when they're talking about like someone getting corrupted, it's like, yeah, the devil took him up to the mountaintop and he took the deal. um and thank you for pointing out that parallel, because that's not something I would have ever noticed on my own, and that's super cool.
Yeah, and it's a recurring trope along the New Testament. So Jesus is in some way equated or uh, made even better than some of the figures, characters in the Old Testament. So we had in Romans Paul equating or making a comparison between Jesus and Adam, and in this gospel reading it is Jesus as the people of Israel in the desert.
Yeah. And I should probably mention too that, like in Catholic theology, this gets brought into the idea that Jesus is the new Adam and Mary is the new Eve.
Mhm. Yeah,
Which, of course, is why when you have the Immaculate Conception, um, you'll have you'll have the image of Mary. There will be a snake underneath her feet, and she'll be stepping on the head of the snake
exactly. Yeah.
because, yeah, because she's the new Eve, she's killing the snake. And also it's kind of, and also it's a matter of dogma that when Mary was in labor with Jesus, she did not suffer pains in labor because she didn't have original sin, so therefore she wasn't required to suffer.
Right, and that reminds me of some, of course, the stories in the apocryphal gospels. They kind of try to dodge the question as to how Jesus was born. So Mary's pregnant, and suddenly there's a blinding light, and Jesus appears,
Yeah,
in the manger or wherever he's
yeah.
put after
Well,
he's born.
and I mean, I do have to say that I kind of think that some of these stories about because the accounts of Jesus's birth in the gospel, speaking as someone who has, been a woman who has
Mhm.
given birth, the idea of giving birth to a baby in that kind of filthy environment, um I mean, I can imagine any woman who was listening to that in the in the first century, before all of this theology has been worked out, just going, how did that happen? Like, no, seriously, how did she not die? How did they how could God let that happen? Right?
Mhm.
Because because the gospel account, you're basically imagining Mary alone in a stable with like maybe a cow to hold on to, right? And so of course, the way that eventually that gets handled is basically by saying it was a miracle. We don't know what happened. All we know is Mary had the baby. There weren't any midwives. So obviously, God did whatever God needed to do to make that not be a horrible experience for his mom. Because I mean, and also, I have to say that, like, if any one of us could go back in time and cause our mother not to suffer in childbirth, I mean, yeah, I would do that. If that was in my power, I would be like, oh yes, there was a blinding flash of light, and then boom, she was holding a baby.
My mom would have appreciated it rather than what happened when I was born. It would have been a much better day.
Yeah. I mean, the closest I've come to there was a flashing light and boom, there was a baby, was when my oldest daughter was born, because she was an emergency C-section, and so they had to knock me out. So I was in labor, I was going down the hallway, I breathed some gas, and then I woke up. Don't recommend it. Do not recommend.
I'll try to avoid it.
Yeah, I would try to avoid an emergency C-section. But yeah. But anyway, point being that, we have here this, really great moment of temptation, this really well crafted story that is, pulling in echoes from Genesis, that's referencing Deuteronomy, that's pulling in from Exodus. So you have just this incredibly rich, multi-layered text that's going on here, and they're all being put into conversation with each other in a really, really beautiful and I think illuminating way. And like, I just have to throw out like one like little shout out to Kip, because he actually complained in the book that, very often when Genesis is read, they split Adam's creation out they split out the creation from the fall, and then he references the section from Paul that's referring to the fall as well. So I just thought it was kind of cute that, like, yeah, everybody agrees these verses should be in conversation with each other because they just are. And I thought that was kind of a neat little thing when I came across it. I was like, wow, yeah, yeah, Kip, you're right. The Catholic Church agrees with you. Good to know. I'm sure that makes a big difference in his life, but there it is. Nonetheless, so was there anything else that people had to say? Okay.
What about this?
Yeah.
Oh, I did look up the Sirach thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Apparently, Martin Luther is wild argument. Because it was not accepted as Jewish canon, he did not accept it into Protestant canon, which
Wow.
which is an argument I understand, but it's weird coming from Martin Luther.
What was this before or after Martin Luther like went like full anti-Semite?
I don't know. That's why I'm saying, like, it's an argument I understand. It is not an argument that I understand coming from him.
Okay.
Like, and I didn't look super deep. I did look a little bit, but I didn't look super deep. But that is apparently the actual reason some of those texts are not included in Protestant canon.
Okay. Well, now we know. Thank you for clearing up that confusion. Okay. So I have just a quick parish announcement. As you've noticed, we've started recording short videos to try to boost engagement and achieve the happy day when we have more subscribers than videos. We're up to 30 subscribers. Go us. Um, yeah, I know. We're fancy. We're in like double digits. Um, Also, there is a really fun and wonderful thing called Lent Madness. You can find it at lentmadness.org. Basically, it's a bunch of people just voting which saints are the best on a head-to-head March Madness style bracket, if you're familiar with American college basketball playoffs. Um, However, and I'm not the only one. Apocryphals has also called out Lent Madness. Like sometimes their matchups are stacked to favor a specific person. One year Santa Claus got knocked out really, really early. So we're doing an alternative. But Lent is the time that you should be researching saints and thinking about saints, not, picking which ones you should listen to. That's more of a Pentecost thing. So, Nerd Church for between now and Easter Sunday is accepting nominations of saints. Then we will have a Pentecost Madness vote off. The results will be released on the Sunday after Easter, which is Divine Mercy Sunday. So get in your nominations. I am, for my first nomination, I am going to put in Our Lady of Guadalupe and Hildegard of Bingen. Does anybody else have a nominee that they want to put in?
Not yet. I would have to think about it.
Okay. So we'll do some thinking. Send your nominations to nerdchurchofficial@gmail.com. Drop them in the comments or make a video with your nominations and tag us because it's going to be fun. And that's all we have. Does anybody else have any announcements they need to get out? Okay. Everybody have a good Lent. And try not to fast